Welcome back to Sikkim 365 Radio. It's time for our weekly segment with John McClain of the Houston Chronicle, brought to you by Pioneer Steel and Pipe, where customer service is their main focus, and best in metal, steel, and pipe for large or small projects, with 2 locations in Waco and Bryan. Family owned and operated since 1943.
Well, Catalina's top 5 in about 15 minutes. Mac Rhodes on earlier today, Pat Nunley. We've heard from Carlos Silva in Lubbock with the crazy of Texas Tech hosting UT, and Evan Miyakawa as well. Now Hall of Famer John McClain. John, a little bit of a bombshell, I guess, from earlier today. The claims from Brian Flores against the NFL or about the hiring practices, text messages. I know it's just happened. What of all that do you know, if anything?
First of all, Brian Flores taking on the NFL and making serious accusations against his former boss, Miami owner Stephen Ross, including embarrassing text message from Bill Belichick, who thought he was congratulating Bill's offensive coordinator Brian Daboll on the job for the Giants. Instead, he was texting Brian Flores, who hadn't even been interviewed. And then he took a shot at let's see, who else? John Elway. And the Broncos have responded, and the Giants have responded. And I'm guessing there's 5 openings left. Texans, I think, are going to hire Josh McCown. Flores has interviewed twice, along with McCown and Philadelphia defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon of the 6 they interviewed overall. But when you take on the league like this, it won't surprise me if his next job's not a major college football program.
Yeah, John, he's taking it, he kind of the way he said it in his statement is he kind of knows that he may never coach in the NFL again. The way that these things go, it might be his Curt Flood moment.
And that would be too bad because he's coming off back-to-back winning seasons. And it's obvious he's irritated at Stephen Ross for firing him. But for word leaking out, he was difficult to get along with, which is what a lot of people said. He went through multiple offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, quarterback coaches in 3 years. And he didn't like that because that's the kind of thing, I'm sure in his interviews, people are asking him about it, and he doesn't believe it. People are not going to admit they're bad communicators, but there's a lot of people that dealt with him, and I'm not just talking about people who worked with him, but people who covered him who said that. And the thing about Belichick and that text that was an accidental text, making Bill Belichick look bad in a lawsuit, I was stunned because Belichick gave him his opportunity in the NFL. They worked together for 15 years, and I'm just really surprised he would do that to Belichick.
John, do you feel like the Rooney Rule has been effective?
No. When they put the Rooney Rule in there, originally you had to interview a minority candidate. And they've modified it. Now it's 2 minority candidates. You have to interview 2 general manager minority candidates. They set up a draft choice system last year. If you lose a head coach or if you lose a guy who becomes a head coach or a general manager, you get draft choices. If you lose a head coach and a general manager, you get 4 compensatory 3rd-round picks over the next 2 years. So they're encouraging teams to develop front office executives as well as assistant coaches who are minorities. There's only 3 minorities in the NFL. That's Mike Tomlin at Pittsburgh, Robert Saleh, who's Lebanese with the Jets, and Ron Rivera, who's Hispanic with Washington. Brian Flores was fired after last season. David Culley was fired after last season. I believe that the most minority coaches we've had at one time was 7. And I go back to something Warren Moon told me in the late 80s when I was talking about, we're writing about black quarterbacks. I was doing a story with him. He said, until you have black ownership, and then the black ownership hires black general managers and black head coaches, you're not going to get as many black quarterbacks as you should or deserve the job. And now that's not an issue with black quarterbacks. And maybe someday it won't be an issue with the head coach, but Warren said you've got to get ownership because people tend to hire people they feel the most comfortable with.
John, it's amazing today. So much is going on, and obviously that has been the most front and center. So the NFL says that they have they'll defend against these claims which are without merit. How do they know that?
Well, they're going to say that. That's what lawyers always say. Lawyers deny everything right off the bat. One of the things they'll say about the Giants is they've interviewed multiple minority candidates. Leslie Frazier, Buffalo's defensive coordinator, twice. Joe Shane, the new Giants general manager, came from the Bills. Most people thought he was going Brian Daboll, and that's what he did. And so unless Flores' lawsuit can prove that Daboll had agreed or signed a contract, and they won't be a signed contract, and that he was discriminated against. So it's something that could go a long time. You know, as we always say, the lawyers are they're the ones getting the money, so they'll drag it out as long as they can. But it's certainly going to be fascinating to watch.
So, John, how does the NFL, I mean, outside of, maybe winning this lawsuit or settling this lawsuit, how does the NFL fix this problem?
They don't fix the problem. You can't make owners hire people. Can't make them hire a white guy. Can't make them hire a Hispanic or a black guy. You can do everything you can to encourage them. You can tell them, we'd like you to do this, but you cannot make them hire someone they don't want to hire.
John, Tom Brady, some guy named Tom Brady finally calls it quits, announcing his retirement today. Obviously, we could run down the list of accolades, but that would run out the rest of the show. So, 7-time Super Bowl champion, your thoughts on one of the greatest ever deciding to call it a career?
The greatest quarterback in history. It's indisputable. There's no way anybody can make an argument for anybody else. And everybody else is competing for number 2. The 5 greatest players I've seen going back to when the Cowboys and the Oilers were born in 1960, and I was 8 years old in Waco. The 5 greatest are Jim Brown, Tom Brady, Jerry Rice, Lawrence Taylor, and Reggie White. And it'd be hard to argue that one of those guys is not among the 5 greatest. And what Brady did that other quarterbacks didn't have to do, he did it during the time of free agency. His teammates came and went. His coaches came and went for the most part. And some of them left and came back after they got fired. And yet he continued to excel. They didn't devote a lot of first-round picks to giving him at wide receiver or at running back like they did Peyton Manning in Indianapolis, and yet he continued to win. And his durability and his magnificent ability to bring his teams from behind, those are the 2 things that stood out the most to me about Brady's unprecedented career.
John, he played with Randy Moss as a Hall of Famer. Gronk will be a Hall of Famer on offense. So it's kind of, if you compare him to, say, like Troy Aikman, who played with several Hall of Famers in front of him, Tom, at least on his side of the ball, there's not a lot of guys. I mean, you might be getting the weeds about some offensive linemen, but really only 2 guys who are for sure Hall of Famers that he played with on offense.
And the Patriots haven't had a lot. Ty Law, Richard Seymour has been a finalist multiple times. I believe at some point he'll make it. They just don't have a lot of guys that are in the Hall of Fame. And no running backs. Randy Moss is. And he had a great season in 2007 with New England. Then they were ready to move on from him. So that was one of the things that was so great about him. You know, he didn't like Peyton Manning. Peyton had Edger James. He had Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne. He had really good offensive linemen because that's the way they built that team around him. And then they were very smart. They got 2 pass rushing defensive ends, Dwight Freeney and Robert Mathis, because they figured they're going to be ahead most games, and the defensive ends could get after the quarterback. It was a great strategy. It resulted in 2 Super Bowls and 1 victory. But I can't wait to see what Brady does next. I don't see him doing a game of the week, having to put that much time in it. Would he be on a studio show? Maybe. If you have ESPN Plus, go to Peyton's Places. He had a great one with him and Brady going to Jim Nance's house when Nance was not home. It was funny. I would love to see a Manning Brady cast next year on ESPN.
Yeah, I think that'd do probably huge numbers, most likely. John, Rams and Bengals, just like we all expected at the start of the year, playing for the Super Bowl title here in a couple of weeks. Bengals, I mean, I asked you about how great the games were last time we talked to you, but somehow the NFL did it again this past weekend with just 2 games, and both were tremendous watches. Your thoughts on championship weekend?
The Rams expected to get this far because they paid so dearly to bring in veteran players, traded 6 number ones and other picks. Don't have another number one until 2024. So they went all in. And being able to play the championship game at home, and now first team to win hopefully to win a championship game and a Super Bowl in your home stadium. If they pull off what Tampa did last year, that means the Cardinals are going to win it next year in Glendale, Arizona. And so I look for the Rams with Matthew Stafford, who's 33, has had a great career. He's won 3 playoff games. He was 0-3 at Detroit. What a great trade for him. And Sean McVay and Stafford were under more pressure than any coach and quarterback going into the playoffs because of everything that they've done to get to that point. And they've lived up to the expectations. Of course, nobody thought the Bengals would get here. I covered the Bengals' 2 Super Bowl losses to the 49ers. The last one, 88, was a heartbreaker. So I kind of have a sentimental place for the Bengals. And if you think about which one of these teams that wins is going to have a chance to win another one, I would say the Rams, because Joe Burrow is in a conference with Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert. They got so many great young quarterbacks in the AFC that the NFC does not have. And the NFC has got some serious catching up to do.
John, you said Josh McCown. How soon do you expect that to maybe happen, and how do they sell a guy who's never coached?
It's so unconventional, not unprecedented. Norm Van Brocklin with the Vikings expansion team in 61 went from leading Philadelphia to the championship to coaching. Coached 13 years, had only 3 winning seasons, but I think we've talked about it enough here. People won't be surprised. And they know they're going to get blasted locally and nationally. But he's been with 12 teams over 18 years. And so many people have talked so positively about him. I'm kind of excited to see how it all plays out.
John, thank you. Baylor's struggles, but handled West Virginia in the end. And now they have, of course, a showdown in Kansas coming up on Saturday, whether either team's going to be healthy or not. We appreciate your time.
Guys, thank you very much. Sick 'em.
That's John McClain.